Hello, everybody, and welcome back to a new episode of the Benchwarmers Sports Talk podcast. As always, I'm Labi, and I'm joined here by Jacob. Jacob, how are you doing today?
It's good, man. I spent all day studying for exams coming up. It's exam season here.
Yep, for all the students out there, happy studying. Hopefully, you get through exam season. We are almost at the Christmas break, just a couple weeks away, and normally that means a lot of exciting things going on in the sports world. Obviously, a bit of a different COVID schedule, but still a lot of big stuff to talk about. Football is exploding to down the back stretch, and then there is some basketball and hockey hopefully on the horizon, including, of course, the big Christmas tournament of the World Juniors, which we might get into talking about in a little bit. But the biggest news of the week came from the world of basketball, and it came out of Houston and Washington as Russell Westbrook and John Wall getting traded for each other. A first round pick also thrown in the deal, going back to Houston. So the Wizards acquire Russell Westbrook, and the Rockets acquire John Wall and a 2023 first round draft pick. And, well, this is a bit of a blockbuster deal. Of course, Westbrook didn't spend very long in Houston, so it seems like that was a failed experiment. Your thoughts on really the first big blockbuster deal of the new NBA season?
Well, honestly, I think this is one of the few deals that have happened within the past week that have been very important. We'll talk about the others later. Um, I think Washington finessed Houston. John Wall hasn't touched the court in years, and who's this first round pick? We have no idea. So we know Westbrook. We know how he can play. We obviously know that him and Harden are very similar in their play styles, very ball kind of hoggish, which is why I always predicted they would never work together. And look what happened. They didn't win and they didn't work together. Um, Good on Washington. Like they picked up Westbrook, who now has a team to kind of control. Like that's his team now, and I think he's going to show. I've never liked Westbrook as a person. He's a good player. I've never really liked him as a person. He's kind of arrogant, kind of nonchalant. Doesn't really care too much about what people have to think about him, which can go both ways. But he's going to come to Washington and he's going to prove everyone wrong. Like, hey, I wasn't the problem in Houston. I wasn't that issue. I was the same kind of person was on that team and we just kind of didn't click. So good on Washington for getting this done.
Yeah, I think it's really the thing with Westbrook is it's so hard to really talk about, evaluating him because they like to talk about sort of getting stuff done, and obviously championships are how everyone gets judged nowadays. But I think it's really difficult because obviously you look at that Thunder dream team where you had Durant, Harden, and Westbrook, and obviously looking back at that, it's so easy to look at that and to say, like, look at how incredible this team was. But you have to remember this is when James Harden was still a six man. Durant was turning and Westbrook were turning into the players that they were. But, at this point, none of them had won MVP or were looking, like they were going to be the players that they ended up becoming. So, as much as that the Thunder team that lost in the conference, no, that lost in the NBA finals to Miami, that's maybe the one chance where you can really judge that trio. But I mean, after that, you look at the Thunder when Durant and Harden left weren't a good enough team, and you also have to talk about Paul George. I'd rather criticize Paul George first on that team, especially because we saw what Paul George did in for the Clippers, and then this past year, yes, the Rockets weren't great and they did not look like championship contenders at all. But at the end of the day, the team they lost to in the playoffs was the Lakers and no one beat the Lakers. So am I going to hold it against the Rockets for losing to the Lakers? I mean, you can definitely be critical of how they played, especially considering that they almost got embarrassed by Luka Doncic single-handedly. Or no, was that the Clippers?
That was the Clippers.
That was the Clippers. Sorry, they almost got embarrassed by the Thunder.
It's the Thunder.
Yes, they almost got embarrassed. I knew they had a tough time in the first round as well. They almost got embarrassed by the Thunder. So you can definitely be critical of Westbrook and his time in the playoffs, and you can definitely be critical of the Rockets last year. But I think it's harsh to sort of label Westbrook as a sort of failure come playoff time, or as a guy you can't lead, because I don't think he's really. I think it's been a very long time since he's been given a fair opportunity. And the tough thing is, I don't think he's going to be given that opportunity with the Wizards. The real question that interests me is you talk about how this is now going to be Westbrook's team. I think Bradley Beal might have something to say about that. I agree with you in the sense that this is probably going to become Westbrook's team, but I think that he's going to have to figure that out with Bradley Beal really quick, because this could be a bit of a similar situation in Houston where you have sort of two guys who want the ball all of the time, and they're going to have to try to figure that out. Because I don't know if this is really going to work well with Bradley Beal. Like hopefully it does, but Beal's used to being the guy, especially because Wall's been injured for the past 2 years, and now all of a sudden he's going to have to give up looks to Westbrook, which in theory should work because less defenders are going to be focused on him. But we know how sometimes in the NBA, if you have a couple of you know ball dominant players, too many ball dominant players, then that can definitely be a problem.
Well, when looking at Beal, he's already commented on the trade. Obviously, he called it shocking, but he likes the fit with Russell Westbrook. So it looks like, or it sounds like, he's ready to kind of adapt and kind of maybe change his play style a little bit so that it, maybe matches with Westbrook's. Because Westbrook came on to the Houston with Harden already in control of that team, and he tried to come and try and take control of that team, and obviously that didn't work out very well. So Beal is willing to adjust how he plays and adjust his mentality on the team so that they're going to win. He wants to win. He's been there for a while now and he wants to win. So, um obviously it's going to be very interesting because they are very similar players, but Harden wasn't willing to change. Beal is. So maybe Beal understands that Westbrook is coming in because he wants to be part of that team and he wants to be their team. And maybe Beal can understand that. It's just Harden and Westbrook were never going to work together. They just don't click and they never have.
Yeah, no, I definitely see your point on that. The interesting thing with Beal, just looking at his stats, since John Wall's been hurt, his points per game has gone up from 22.6 to 25.6 to last year he had 30.5 points per game. And so this is a guy who is becoming more of a scorer, and he's emerging as a true really talented player. I mean, he was snubbed. Um, I'm gonna forget now. I'm pretty sure no, or was he snubbed as an All Star? I know he was definitely. A lot of people wanted him on the All NBA team, and I know for a fact he wasn't put on the All NBA team. I can't remember for sure whether or not he was an All Star this past season. I want to assume that he was, but I mean, this is a player who um, he was finally emerging as people really recognizing the sort of talent that he has, and he really deserves to be recognized. I'm just scrolling through the names here. He was not an All Star last year, and so you see that's the exact point where he had 30. He was averaging 30 points per game last year, and he was snubbed as an All Star. So, what does that what does that say? And now all of a sudden he has another ball dominant player in Westbrook coming in. Like you said, he's willing to change. I sincerely hope that that ends up working out, because we've seen instances where this is a guy who might want to become the guy, and all of a sudden he's going to have to give up those chances. And I mean, you look at Westbrook's getting up there in age. Beal is still quite young. It's going to be very interesting to see how this works out.
Well,
Very interesting to see how this works out.
here's the thing. Here's something you said. He says he's getting more points per game. Yeah, because he's playing 36, 37 minutes a game. For like when Wall was there, he was only playing 30 minutes, not 36, not 37. and he was averaging 23 points instead of his 25 to 30. So that's what happens is when your star player gets out, they're going to play you more and you're going to become the star of the team. And you're going to get more shots and you're going to get more playing time and you're going to get more assists. Your percentage will be worse now because you're shooting more, you're scoring more, you're missing more. So I think it's a little hard to say that it's his team in the sense that he's been there his whole career, but he's always been overshadowed by Wall. And now that Wall's gone, he's kind of had to step up. And like Wall's been gone for a few years now. He played 82 games the first year Wall went out, and he played 82 games last year. He only played 57 last year. Well, obviously because of COVID, but he would have played the whole season. You can't do that to a guy who's not used to playing 82 games a season. Like if if Matt Murray got hurt, let's say for example, you can't expect Jari to come in and play the same amount of games he played before. Obviously, different circumstances now, and he will be playing it. But that's what happens when your star player leaves. You have to step up. And now that they bring Westbrook in, maybe they don't have to rely on Beal so much. Maybe they can rely more on Westbrook and let Beal kind of be like a secret agent in which he's doing well, but people don't notice, which is good for Wall unless he likes the publicity. But I don't think it really matters to him. So I see this as I see this as a very good opportunity for both Westbrook and Wall. Westbrook kind of has a fresh start. He's in a new division. He's switched over from the West. He's now in the East. Bunch of new players. He's not really played against very often, and he's got a guy who's willing to change for him. So I think Washington's going to have a very interesting year for sure.
Yeah, and I think the last sort of thing that I'll ask before we move on is obviously we were talking about the East, and in a previous episode we talked about how sort of the last couple of playoff spots in that conference are wide open. I mean, we were both talking about it. You have Brooklyn, you have Milwaukee, you have Boston, you have Toronto, you have Philadelphia, you have Miami, and we kind of agreed that those six are all locks. And then a couple of weeks ago, we were talking about how Atlanta might be one of those sneaky teams to get one of those last spots. And then we were talking about, who else would get there. And we were talking about, potentially like an Orlando Magic always sneaking into that eight spot like they always do. Do you think that the Wizards could make the playoffs in the East with this roster?
Well, that is a tough question because the East is getting back. Well, is getting back. The East is getting the Nets. KD is going to be healthy. Kyrie's going to be healthy. Like there are other teams in the East that are very very dominant. Trae Young on Atlanta is going to be absolutely nuts this year. Do Washington make the playoffs? Yes, but they barely squeak in, and I don't think they get past the first round. But the fact that they get in could definitely be a huge, or if they just miss it by like 1 or 2 points. Like if they just miss it or they make it, then I can see Washington like building on that and drafting right or trading right and then absolutely becoming not a powerhouse in the East, but definitely a team that we see more and more common in that division playoffs.
Yeah, I think it's going to be really interesting. I think it's going to come down to them, and I think them, Orlando, and Indiana are going to be fighting for sort of those last playoff spots. The one thing I will say regarding, will they make the playoffs or not, I don't think this necessarily improves their chances. I think that, once again, I think John Wall's a huge question mark because, he hasn't played in so long. Uh, so we just have to assume that the John Wall that comes back is the John Wall of old, which was a hell of a good player. Like I think even hardcore Wizards fans forget how good John Wall is just because he hasn't played in so long. But that's like you said, that's a question mark because he hasn't played in so long. But I think if you take John Wall at sort of who he was prior to injury, and you replace him with Westbrook, I'm not saying that the team gets worse, but I don't necessarily see how they get better. And so I think that regardless of whether they have Wall or now that they have Westbrook, I think that they're a fringe 8 seed at best. But it certainly makes those last few spots a little bit more interesting. And of course, the NBA is switching up the formatting rules. So for the playoffs, it's going to be the 7 seed through the 10 seed. There's a play in, And I think that's going to make that made things really interesting in the bubble in the Western Conference. For those of you who don't remember, we had the Phoenix Suns going 8-0 in the bubble, trying to sneak into the playoffs, which was super exciting to watch.
Man, that
Uh,
sucked.
yeah, and now you might have a similar situation in the East because you're going to have a couple of teams like the Hawks, the Wizards, the Pacers, the the Magic.
Magic.
Those are four teams right there who I would personally predict as being the 7 through 10 seeds right now. If you really had to, pull me on it, and I think that if those four teams had a play in for the last two playoff spots, I think that would be very entertaining to watch.
I agree. Also, yeah, it sucked last year that the Suns went 8-0 and still didn't make the playoffs. But anyways, that's besides the point. There is some other NBA news, and both coming out of LA. Big mans Anthony Davis and LeBron James have agreed to contracts. LeBron James, the king of the NBA, has agreed to a 2-year, $85 million max contract extension locked up until 2023, while big man Anthony Davis finalized a 5-year contract worth $190 million. Are the Lakers the favorite to win the next 2 years? Are they going to go back to back to back?
So here's the thing. So LeBron, 2-year deal. Once again, you kind of figured he'd resign. I'm assuming he'll retire in LA, but the 2-year deal makes sense because his son Bronny,
I read
he
this.
graduates high school 2023. So if they change the draft rules, which a lot of people think they will, if they change the draft rules so you can make the NBA straight out of high school like you used to before, then 2023 or the next time LeBron's a free agent, his son might get drafted. And so I can see him wanting that flexibility so that he can play on whatever team his son plays on his rookie year and have that be his last year. Because I think a lot of people think that's sort of the path that he's going to take. So with LeBron, I think that makes a lot of sense. And I mean, I can probably call it now. I think that if they were to change that rule, and this is no disrespect on Bronny, but I mean, apparently there are like a bunch of players in his draft class that are rated a lot higher than him. Obviously, we're still 2 years away, so you have no clue how that's going to change. But I wouldn't be surprised if the Lakers just pick him much higher than he probably deserves to go, so that LeBron can re-sign again for one more year, retire as a Laker, and have Bronny be a rookie that final year. So that didn't, surprise me too much. The one thing that surprised me was that Anthony Davis signed for 5 years
Yeah,
because
that's a big contract.
that surprises me, especially because if you look at the makeup of this Lakers team is LeBron, AD, and then whatever role players they can put around them. And so you have to think like obviously I'm not going to talk about when is LeBron finally going to fall off because a lot of people have been guilty of saying that LeBron's going to fall off and he does not fall off. So I'm not saying that LeBron's going to fall off. What I'm instead going to say is if you think LeBron James 5 years from now is still going to be in the NBA, like I don't see it. So I'm surprised that Anthony Davis signed for so long considering that I'm assuming that his last 2 years of that 5-year contract, he won't have LeBron with him.
And I think that's kind of what he wanted. I think obviously he was the guy in New Orleans. LeBron is kind of the guy here in LA, and these two guys have always been kind of the guy of their team. So now you have two guys that are both extremely talented. LeBron, like you said, may stay 3 years, one with his son, and then retire there. Then you got AD, who's got 2 more years left on that contract. So he's just gonna take control of that team. If he wants to stay, he can stay. If like you said, if Bronny actually develops properly and is actually as good, not as good as his dad, but he can play definitely excellent basketball, then I see this as a win for the LA Lakers. It's like insurance policy. Once LeBron's gone, you can always rely that AD is going to be there. Like even if LeBron retires in 2 years or 3 years, you have AD there for at least another two. So it's kind of an insurance policy in which maybe if AD is still performing, they can make some trades, go in a rebuild. Who knows at that point? And if they do that, then obviously, if they have to blow the team up because it's just not working anymore, then they do that. But for now, like it's a huge deal. It's a ridiculous deal. it came after LeBron signed, so I think he was waiting for LeBron to sign or resign. It's just both of these players signed max contracts, and both of these players will be playing still in their prime. Arguably, James could be coming down soon from that high, but I think it's a good deal. I think Anthony Davis wants to be control of his team when LeBron goes, and I think he will be.
Yeah, I think the one thing that sort of tipped the scales in the balance of a longer term deal is Anthony Davis, with his injury history, wants that security of a 5 year deal and having that guaranteed money. So I can see that being a big reason why. The only reason I bring it up is because he spent 7 years essentially trapped in New Orleans on a very bad team. And so once again, I'm not suggesting that the Lakers are a very bad team. I think that for the next 2 seasons at least, with LeBron's new deal, the Lakers are, if not the biggest favorite, definitely contenders to win the title for the next 2 years. Um, my point is, if in that last year of that deal, for example, he finds himself, the last 2 years even potentially, he finds himself stuck on a subpar, a team that he can't win a championship on. But no, I definitely see, with the injury history, wanting that security, like you said, getting to be the leader of the team, sort of transitioning from LeBron. And obviously, it's a lot better to be stuck in LA than it is to be stuck in a smaller market like New Orleans. So, no, I definitely understand. It's definitely a win for the Lakers. And I mean, when you're talking about a 5 year, $190 million contract, I don't really see how you can be a loser as an individual. So, I mean, got to get your money, and Anthony Davis certainly got his.
And like you said, if AD is on a subpar team, he can ask to leave, get traded, and if he's still producing, they can get good value out of him. They could arguably get one or two first round picks and a couple of second rounders if he's still performing. So I think this just worked out perfectly for the Lakers.
Yeah, no, absolutely. It's definitely, the Lakers are still in a very, very good place moving forward. And the last thing I'll say regarding the NBA is, no word on Giannis signing that supermax deal. So, literally, fans of every single fan base, but particularly, I know Lakers fans think they're going to get him. Heat fans think they're going to get him. Raptors fans think they're going to get him. Deluded Knicks fans somehow think they're going to sign a free agent not named Julius Randle, but let them believe what they want to believe. Let them believe what they want to
Well,
believe.
I don't think the Lakers need one. They already have an Antetokounmpo. Boom, problem solved.
The last thing I'll say about Giannis too is he was talking in a interview or a press. He was talking somewhere, and he was saying how he wants those superstars to come to him in Milwaukee, which might mean that he will sign that contract, but he has a deadline. I can't remember the exact deadline. I'm pretty sure it's near the end of December, but he hasn't signed yet. And so, once again, I hate speculating because that's all people in the media do. They've been talking about Giannis to the Warriors for like the last year. Like, really. So the last thing I want to do is do all this useless speculation because that doesn't mean anything. I'm just pointing out that he hasn't signed yet, and we'll wait for all the speculating until after the deadline passes.
Okay, I want to say
But
one more quick thing before
of
we go.
course,
It's interesting how you said he wants them to come to him. Like he seems he you know what he's acting like? He's acting like LeBron. Like he's LeBron caliber. He's close, but he's not there. So it's going to be interesting to see if players will actually believe in the system because they look at LeBron. LeBron's gone to teams and he's won it there. Antetokounmpo hasn't brought any people in and he hasn't won. So it'll be actually interesting to see if anyone actually decides in free agency to go to the Bucks to try and win it there. Obviously, a few players have gone already, but I don't think it's going to be enough to win.
yeah, it'll be very interesting to see what happens. Now, switching gears onto the NFL, and we are hitting the tail end of the season, and there's still a lot up in the air, but we're getting a more clear playoff picture of what the playoffs could look like, what the division winners could look like, if anyone in the NFC East is going to hit 5 wins. Fingers crossed.
Well, the
Um,
Giants just lost their quarterback, so
Yeah, hopefully Daniel Jones is listed as doubtful for the Seahawks, which we'll get into. But actually, that's probably, I guess, where we'll start.
we'll start
Um,
there.
I'm hoping if he misses a game, you know what? What I'm really hoping for is, I really don't expect us to beat the Seahawks anyways. So I'm hoping we take he takes this week off. We take the L because we are going to get the L against the Seahawks anyways, and then he returns fully healthy for the final stretch of the season. Because if we look at the standings in the AFC East or the NFC East, I mean, it looks like six. I'm gonna call it now and say 6 wins is probably enough to take the division.
That's brutal. What a terrible division. Because yeah, you have two teams tied at 4-7. The Eagles are 3-7-1. The Cowboys are 3-8-0, and all of those teams have a chance to take the division lead.
Yeah, and if you look at the matchups this week, the Giants are most likely going to lose to the Seahawks, especially if Danny Dimes isn't playing.
Danny
Then
Dimes.
you have the Eagles are probably going to get demolished by the Packers. The
Yeah.
Steelers are probably going to stay undefeated, beating Washington.
Yep.
And the Ravens are probably going to beat the Cowboys.
Oh, you know what? The way the Ravens have been playing, I don't know. I really don't know about them. I don't know what is going on. Um, I I don't know what's going on with them. Like they were supposed to have one of the best seasons in arguably franchise history, and the Browns are ahead of them. The Browns are 2 games ahead of them. Like, what is going on with them? I don't. Can you give me your idea or your opinion on why they're doing so poorly this year?
Yeah, I said potentially also because we don't know what's going on at quarterback because we don't know if Lamar Jackson's going to be back, and they just moved RG3 to the injury reserve, which means for all you memers out there, I mean, if Trace McSorley ends up starting at quarterback for the Baltimore Ravens, you got to be blasting the song in the background. Throw it on, put it on a dime. My guy Trace McSorley. Shout out Trace McSorley if he ends up playing. Um, I mean, he's my quarterback number 9, Trace McSorley. No, but for real, I mean, I think that the Ravens this year, obviously they're in an extremely tough division. Obviously, they haven't had the best of times with injuries and COVID,
The
but those are
Ravens
all
are.
excuses.
Hold up. The Ravens are not in a tough division. You
Sure,
have the
they are. The
Browns.
Steelers. The Steelers are 11-0,
Okay,
and as
fine.
much as we
Yes.
like to make fun of the Browns, like the Browns on paper are a very talented team, and as much as they don't look like an 8-3 team, you still have to give them the respect that their
Okay.
record
Listen,
shows.
I'm a Browns fan. I have watched every single game the Browns have played. They have one win against a team over 500. How are you expected to play a team like Baltimore or Pittsburgh or whoever they're going to play in the first round of the playoffs when you have one win against a team over 500? Yes, they're 8-3. Yes, they're doing great. Yes, they're playing out of their minds, and I'm loving it. They beaten Jacksonville. They beaten Texas. Texans. They beaten the Colts when the Colts were not as great as they are now. Like a lot of speculation and question marks are around this team. Baker Mayfield is inconsistent. He's like driving on the highway. You're doing great. You're going 100 and then you get stopped and then you go 2 miles per hour. And he's doing that. And it's the running game. It's the duo between Nick Chubb and Kareem Hunt is I would argue is one of the only reasons why this team is 8-3. Now,
Oh, absolutely. They rely on their run game. But once again, if your run game is that strong, then obviously you have to use it. And you know me, I'm very critical of Baker Mayfield. I don't think he's a franchise quarterback. I think he's a good quarterback. Don't get me wrong, he's a good quarterback,
he is a
but
quarterback of a
he's not
team.
top tier. He's the definition of like a C plus B minus starting quarterback.
Um, yeah, I'll give you that. Okay, so Browns have lost to the Steelers, the Ravens, and the Raiders. Now, what is the common theme in between them? Is they're
They're all
all over
very good teams.
500. They're all over
But you
500.
have to. You also have to mention though that the Ravens have 2 losses to the Steelers, the Chiefs, the Titans, and the one bad loss that they have is against the Patriots. But once again, if you want to hold Bill Belichick summoning like a full-on fucking tornado slash hurricane or whatever you want to call that down the final drive. No, obviously I'm not using that as an excuse. They should have demolished the Patriots way before they needed points on their final drive. But I think it's also like we've definitely mentioned it before, but I mean add controlling the weather to the list of things that Bill Belichick can do. But I think the biggest problem with the Baltimore Ravens this year, and Lamar Jackson admitted it in an interview, he was saying that the defense were reading plays. Like the defense were calling out sort of the exact play that the offense was going to run just before they were about to snap the ball, and that's a problem. And I think that the reason why the Ravens were so explosive last year is because they were running an offensive style that teams hadn't seen in a while, and they had to know how to defend against Lamar Jackson. And I'm not saying that they figured it out. All the defenses have figured it out in a year because they're still 6-5. They're still a good team, but they're not the same sort of unstoppable offense that they once were. And I think that's the difference, where the defenses have finally learned how to sort of stop the basic Ravens offense, and Lamar Jackson and the Ravens coaching staff haven't been able to properly make on the fly adjustments in game to get better at that. And personally, the person that I'm going to criticize the most is Harbaugh, the coach of the Ravens, because I think that the Ravens have been badly coached this year. And I mean, it's obviously part of it's on Lamar, because part of your job as a quarterback is to improve. I mean, you look at Mahomes. Mahomes was talking about how he didn't know how to read defenses in the first year and a half. Now that he knows how to read defenses, the Chiefs down 28-0, you're still assuming that they're going to go back and win, because they've learned how to change their offense on the fly. And they have a coach in Andy Reid who's fantastic at making those adjustments. And I haven't seen Baltimore be able to do the same thing this year. And I think that's the main problem.
I think the main problem isn't Lamar. Here's what I've always said about coaches is they will always pay the price for their players not playing well. Yes, they're having games this year that the Ravens have been outcoached. Don't take it away. Harbaugh was not able to win those games. Lamar, before he got COVID, was still doing pretty bad. Your job as a quarterback is to be able to read plays as they happen. And I understand, I'm not a professional player. I don't know what it's like on that field. But if you're training your whole life to be this person that's supposed to be able to read plays and be able to understand what the defense is going to do when it's going to do it, then I'm blaming you. And if Tom Brady throwing as many picks as he has, I blame him. That has nothing to do with Bruce Arians. But don't get me wrong, Bruce Arians' gameplay and the way he plays is completely different to what Brady does. If you look at someone like Josh Allen, who's taken the Bills to an 8-3 record, like I think was it George? Is it McVay is the coach, or is it Dermott?
Sorry, which team?
Buffalo.
Uh, Buffalo is
Sean McVay, yeah.
McDermott. Yeah, it's McVay's L.A. It's
L.A.
is it McDermott or Dermott? I can't remember. It's yeah.
Anyways, my point is Josh Allen and it's Sean McDermott. Okay, Sean McDermott is the coach for the Bills. Like, if you look at that team, Allen is able to adapt on the plays. I've seen it happen. He's called out players that are going to come. The player has come, but they've been stopped or the play's been gone by the time they get there because Allen saw it. Lamar Jackson, you are a quarterback of the Baltimore Ravens, which had one of the best seasons last year, lost to the Chiefs and lost to the Titans in a heartbreaker. You are expected to come back and do absolutely wonders, and you've done absolutely nothing. So either a coaching change needs to happen. As bold as I say it, they're on a 3-game losing skid. They have a losing record at home, and they've only won the last 3 games they've played. They've lost, and lost. They have 1 win in 5 games. And now, I don't want to blame Lamar because it's not all his fault. I'm going to blame him for his play and the lack of everything in which he's doing right now. The lack of playing. But as a team, they need to sit down and they need to really understand and figure out what is going on. There are not very many games left in this season. The Browns are playing. Who are the Browns playing next week? So the Browns are playing the Titans tomorrow, which could go both ways. But the Browns play the Ravens next week on Monday night. So Ravens, if they don't win that game, I'm calling their season. I'm because the Browns are playing the Giants and the Jets after that two games, and then they play the Steelers on the very last game. I'm calling that season if the Ravens cannot beat the Browns in 2 weeks on Monday. Why? Because then if say if who's Baltimore playing? So say the Browns lose tomorrow, they go to 8-4. Jaguars and Ravens. So if the Jaguars beat the Ravens, which is more than possible the way these teams have been playing, then the Browns will have an 8-4 record, and the Ravens will have a 6-6 record. So if you don't win that game as Baltimore, your record is now 6-7, and the Browns is 9-3. There's no way you're coming back from that. So if I'm Jim Harbaugh, or if I'm whoever's going in as that quarterback, you need to get it together, or else the Browns are going to run away with it. They're still in striking distance of the Browns, don't get me wrong. It's just a 2-game difference. But when one team is on a 3-game winning skid and the other is on a 3-game losing skid, it's it's concerning for Ravens fans. And I think if they don't get it figured out, they're not making the playoffs this year. And if they do, they're not making it far.
No, I hear what you're saying. Here's why I'm not gonna be calling the Ravens season anytime soon. Because you look at their remaining games. They have the Cowboys, the Browns, the Jaguars, the Giants, and the Bengals. At worst, at absolute worst, they're going 3-2. You can't look at that slate of games and tell me that they're not doing worse than 3-2.
Okay, fine,
So
but that game
even at
against the
absolute worst, you're going 3-2. That's a 9-7 finish. And I'm sorry, but if you look at this, if you look at the playoff picture with three wildcard teams, yes, the Browns are going to be a wildcard team ahead of them. At like, if the Ravens finish 9-7, I'm assuming the Browns are going to be better than 9-7. Can you pick two other teams that are going to be better than the 9-7 Ravens? You have the Dolphins slash the Bills, right?
Okay.
That could be the other team. You have the Colts slash the Titans.
Yeah.
That could be the other team.
Yeah. That's what
So
it'll be. That's what it'll be.
that's what it's going to come down to. I'm telling you, 9-7 at the worst, they might miss out. But I'm telling you, they could easily go 5-0. I think the one game that they might lose could be the Browns. I think they go 4-1 down the stretch. I think they finish 10-6, and I think they sneak into the playoffs as a wild card team. So that's why I'm not writing off their season. But I do agree with you in the general sense of this is very concerning, considering that I think a lot of people at the start of the year were predicting the Ravens to win, including us. We're predicting the Ravens to win this division, and we're predicting the Ravens to be a potential Super Bowl favorite. Not that either of us had them in the Super Bowl in our predictions, but a lot of people thought that they were going to do really good this year. And the fact that it's now only week 13 and we're already writing them off for the division. Like they're almost actually I think they're mathematically out of the division race because there's 5 games left. So the Steelers lose out at 11-5, the Ravens win out at 11-5, the Steelers hold the tiebreaker. So they're mathematically eliminated from the division in week 13. And this is a team that a lot of people thought would win that division no problem. So I agree with you in that sense of, the Ravens season is not going the way that they thought it would go, but I'm not ready to say that I'm not ready to call off their season just yet. And so just to sort of bring this back around, what I wanted to do today is sort of look at every division and talk about who we think the favorites to win the division are.
Sure.
We talked about the NFC East briefly, and so we'll move on from that. I'm gonna stay true to my team. I'm gonna say the Giants win that division just because I'm kind of biased and I have to say that. And obviously, I think it's very obvious. I mean, as much as the Browns at 8-3 are in with a shout, the Steelers are winning this division.
Oh, there's no question. Hold on. So are we gonna go? Let's start on the NFC. Let's just move to the NFC. We'll get to the AFC after.
Well,
So
I was just gonna talk about the two divisions that we had
oh,
talked
okay,
about
okay. So
first,
okay,
and
so
then
then
we'll move
yes.
on from there.
So NFC East, yes, the Giants are winning that, and I think they're gonna end up with like a six, like you said, 6 games, and I think that's enough to win it, which is pathetic. But the Giants are gonna win that, and the Steelers, no one's coming close. I think the Steelers are gonna go undefeated this season.
That's bold. I'm not gonna say whether or not they go undefeated because personally I don't think it matters.
No, it doesn't matter, but I'm just saying, like, here are the teams. They play the Washington team, the Bills, the Bengals, the Colts, the Browns. They can win at least 4 of those games, and the Bills or the Colts will give them the most trouble.
Here's my prediction.
Sure.
I think that the Steelers rest a lot of their players in that
Mm.
last game against the Browns, especially because with that being a huge rivalry, injury risk, and all of that. And I think because the Steelers will have essentially wrapped up the number one seed at that point, they'll be able to rest everyone. It won't matter. They'll be thinking about the playoffs. The Browns will be still fighting for seeding within the wild card. So I think they go into I think they could actually even lose to the Colts the week before, but I think best case scenario for the Steelers, they go in 15-0 and then they lose the last game to the Browns.
Ballsy. But it makes 100% complete sense. Like, I totally agree with you in the sense that they'll probably rest half of their starters. They may not even play Big Ben for those last 2 games, but if they do and they decide they just want to rip everyone's hearts out and just go 16-0, I wouldn't be doubtful of it. Okay, let's move on to the next division. Do you want to start in the NFC or the AFC?
Well, I wanted to move on to because I think the best game uh, coming up in this week in the NFL is the Rams and the Cardinals. And the reason I say that is because the NFC West is absolutely ridiculous still. The Seahawks at 8-3, the Rams at 7-4 play the 6-5 Cardinals, and despite all the odds stacked against them, the 49ers at 5-6 are still alive, kind of, if
Big
they finish
question mark.
strong.
Big question mark.
Big question mark, but technically, mathematically still alive. We talked about the Seahawks. They play the Giants this week. That should be a win. The Rams playing the Cardinals, and then the 49ers are playing the Bills this week. So, once again, that's why when I talk about this division, I think the Seahawks will win this week. I think the 49ers will lose this week to the Bills, drop to 5-7, and that's essentially their playoff hopes almost certainly gone. But the
Hmm.
reason I want to talk about this division is because I think one, Rams Cardinals is a huge matchup, and two, I think this division is still wide open. So your thoughts on that game and also the division as a whole?
I think it'll be a great game. I think where do they stand together? Like, yeah, they're hand in hand. Cardinals win, they tie with the Rams. Rams lose, they tie with the Cardinals. Like, these two teams are going to be fighting for arguably the last wild card spot, and they will be until the very end of the season because
There's
they
also
have
the possibility that with a Rams win, they also stay within a game of the Seahawks, trying
yeah,
to stay in
exactly.
the race for the division.
And if you look at the last 2 games they play the Seahawks and they play the Cardinals again. So, not to say that they are not, like, if the Cardinals lose, it's not to say that they're not out of it because they can definitely get that, like, they can win that last game, and assuming, and then they have some pretty easy games. They have the Giants, the Eagles, and the 49ers. So, I like Arizona. I don't like the Rams. I can't tell you why. I just do not like them. So, if I were to put $1 on it or $20, I would say the Cardinals actually finish ahead of the Rams, and it's not out of my. I'm not. I like making some hot takes here. I can see that if the Seahawks lose, obviously 2 games, they play some pretty easy teams. So maybe not. I was gonna say if they lost like 2 games and Cardinals won 4, I could see the Cardinals taking that division. But obviously with the return of Josh Gordon and DK Metcalf being an absolute monster, ending people's careers and their reputation, obviously not. It's not a hot take. It's just a stupid take at that point. But I can see the Cardinals coming in second in the division. I can totally see it because they'll be fighting with the Rams till the very end.
I can see that too. I think that first of all, just talking about who's going to win the division, I think that I agree with you. The Rams are the only team that can catch the Seahawks, and I think that the only way the Rams are going to be able to do it, like you say, is if they win those key divisional matchups. Looking at the Cardinals twice and the Seahawks once, and so it comes down to who do you think are going to win those divisional games? And I think that right now, because this division is so close, you have to lean towards who's already shown you the most and that's the Seahawks. So I think the Seahawks, obviously, I mean, I picked them to win the Super Bowl, so I'm obviously going to stay true to that.
All right.
I think they're going to win the division. Now, this is the tough prediction in terms of Rams and Cardinals because, like you said, they still have to play twice, including the matchup this weekend. This is tough because it almost comes down to which version of Jared Goff are you going to see because he's been wildly inconsistent. Some weeks he's looked like the number one pick, and other weeks he's looked like some bum that's only being carried by Sean McVay's offense. Um, the Rams defense have impressed me this year. So is the Cardinals defense. But then the question becomes, what's the Rams defense going to look like against Kyler Murray? What's the Cardinals defense going to look like against I'm going to say Sean McVay because let's be real, Sean McVay is the captain of that offense, not Jared Goff at quarterback. And
100%.
so here's the thing. Most of the time it comes down and I've been saying this for most weeks. For me it comes down to who has the better quarterback, who has the better coach. And this is so wildly unpredictable because the Cardinals have the better quarterback, the Rams have the better coach. This is such a toss up for me. So once again, I'm going to go default to which team has the better record, and I think the Rams right now with the better record. I think if they split the games against the Cardinals, they should do enough to stay ahead of them. But I mean, I definitely would not bet against you saying Cardinals ahead of Rams. I think that can definitely happen. The one thing I will say is I think both of these teams will make both of these teams will make the playoffs as two of the three wild card teams.
I think that the Cardinals will be the best team in that division in the next 3 years. I think Kyler Murray has been playing absolutely incredible. Assuming Russell Wilson plays like Russell Wilson, then maybe not. But he has had better seasons, and he kind of had, they're 3-3 on and away. They're perfect at home, but that away record is a little concerning to me because half your season is on the road. And
Not
yes,
in the playoffs if you have home field advantage. Just
it's
saying, just
it's
saying.
it's true. It is true. So I guess we'll have to see what happens in the future.
No, absolutely. I agree with you. I think the Cardinals are probably looking the strongest long term in the division. Then again, Russell Wilson's been elite for a very long time, and he probably will be moving forward. But the reason I say the Rams and the Cardinals to both make the wild card is, of course, there's three wild card spots this year, and we all know that the NFC East is only getting one team in, and that's because they have to because of the division.
Yeah.
And moving on to the NFC South, we all know that if the Saints win the division, the Buccaneers will probably make the wild card. And if the Buccaneers miraculously turn it around and win the division, the Saints will make the wild card. And so the only thing that's preventing the Rams and the Cardinals both making it as wild card teams is if the Falcons or Panthers magically turn it on, which I don't think they will, or if the Vikings or Bears at 5 and 6 find a way to turn their seasons around. And the Bears are playing the Lions and the Vikings are playing the Jaguars, so they could both win this week and move up to 6 and 6. And that's why I say this gets interesting because if the Cardinals lose this week and they fall to 6 and 6, there's three 6 and 6 teams. Only one of them are going to make the playoffs. And I know we're talking about the division leaders, so I'll ask you the question just because I have to. Is anyone catching the Packers in this division? And then when you say no, the follow up question is, can the Vikings or Bears sneak into the playoffs? Even though that answer is probably still no.
First off, when did the Vikings become 5-6? What? How have they been doing that? And second off, no one is catching the Packers. And two, no, neither teams are making the playoffs. Both teams are over. The Bears have lost 5 in a row. Holy crap!
Yeah, remember when they were five
They
and
were
one, and everyone
whole.
thought that they were going to win the division? Haha, funny times.
Holy crap! When did this happen? Who they lost? Who they lost to? They lost to the Rams, the Saints, the Titans, the Vikings, and the Packers. Oh my goodness! I had no. I mean, I don't care about the Bears, but my goodness, come on! How? Oh my god! Um, neither of these teams are gonna make it. It's just facts. Like Vikings have no business being 5-6 this year. Bears have no business being 5-6. You guys deserve nothing. The Lions are still in it, and here is where I'm gonna make it a little interesting. And
No way.
oh yeah,
No way.
listen, just hear me out. The Lions play the Bears. tomorrow. They then have to lose to the
Then they lose to
Packers.
the Packers, lose to the Titans, lose to the
Yep,
Bucks, probably lose to the Vikings.
probably. I think they're gonna beat the Vikings that last game. Okay, so now the Vikings they have to play the Jags tomorrow. So say both of these teams win, they have to play the Bucks, the Bears, the Saints, which you can argue those they can lose all three of those games. And then we look at the Bears. They play Detroit tomorrow. Then they play the Texans, the Vikings, the Jags, and the Packers. Now, here's where I'm going to draw the line and say I only think Detroit will make it if the Bears lose to the Vikings and the Packers and the Texans. Because I don't think I don't trust the Jaguars. They're garbage. But here is my hot take of the day. The Detroit Lions, no more Matt Patricia, will go to second in that division. They will beat the Bears this weekend and move up to third. Or they will beat the Bears and the Vikings will lose and now Detroit's in second. It's more than possible that Detroit makes that and it's more than possible that it'll happen. So, before you count out the Lions, understand that Matthew Stafford is still elite. He is on a bad team. Don't get me wrong. But the
Well,
Vikings
when you say count out the lines, you mean in terms of being able to finish second in the division? Because obviously, they won't be making the playoffs this year.
No, no, and I'm not saying they're going to make it. I don't think anyone else from this division will make it, but
Right. So your point is they finish second in the division, and then the wild card spots go to the Rams, Cardinals, and then most likely Buccaneers.
correct. Also, the Falcons are no longer last in their division, which is surprising to me. Um, yeah, I think Detroit finishes second in there, and I think Chicago fans go home and want Matt Trubisky's head on their platter. That's all.
Yeah. I mean, once again, I don't trust the Bears. If I was going to make a bold prediction, I'd say the Vikings sneak into the playoffs, but I just don't
Oh,
trust them. But I can see it happening because if you look at the remaining schedule, I think they can beat the Jaguars. I think they can beat the Bears. I think they can beat the Lions. That's 3 wins. Whether they beat the Bucks or the Saints is unlikely, but if they win those 3 games and go down the stretch 3-2, that gets them to 8-8. If you look at the Cardinals on their schedule, they can lose twice to the Rams. They can lose to the 49ers. They play the Eagles or the Giants. I mean, maybe they get upset there. I can see the Cardinals only winning 2 of those last 5, and that would drop them to 8-8. And then I'm not sure what the tiebreaker would be at that point because I don't think the Cardinals and the Vikings do not play this year. So at that point, I'm not sure what the tiebreaker is. I got to admit. So I don't know if that would be enough for the Vikings to get in on a tiebreaker, but I think that they could both finish 8-8. So my point is, I'm not going to count out the Vikings. But the reason I'm saying that is because on paper, this Vikings team was good enough to make the playoffs, and the fact that their chances of doing that right now at 5-6 are slim to none shows that this year was a disappointment. So I think that the Vikings have to be looking at this season as a failure. Because right now I think that 8-8 is probably the best they can do, and whether that's enough to sneak into the playoffs, it's probably not, but it might just be. So I think we have to look at it that way, and that's a really disappointing year for them. But I think if I was to make a bold prediction, it would be Vikings at 8-8 sneak into the playoffs if all the tiebreakers go their way. But my point is that's such a hot take that I don't think I'm committed enough to say it because I don't see it happening. I just want to throw it out there, as in it's possible and it's not that crazy, but it's possible.
it's a little crazy, but
It's
it
it's
is
it's a little
it is
crazy, but
it
for
is
for me to say
possible.
the Vikings go 3-2 down the stretch and the Cardinals go 2-3 down the stretch, like when you word it that way, it doesn't seem that crazy, which is why I'm throwing it out there because it's crazy, but it's not that crazy.
All right, I'll give you that. What division are we going to look at next?
And just to quickly wrap up the NFC, I mean the Falcons and Panthers are pretty much out of it. So just a simple question: can the Buccaneers catch the Saints, or are we looking at Saints one Buccaneers as a wild card team in that NFC South?
That's exactly what it is. Saints are going to win it, and the Bucks will be a wild card spot. Although I still do think the Bucks are going to make the Super Bowl and they're going to play the Chiefs. I'm not changing that.
There you go. And speaking of the Chiefs, we'll switch it back to the AFC. We talked about the AFC North with the Steelers. Let's talk about the AFC West because I think this is pretty obvious as well. No one is catching the Chiefs.
No.
They will be winning that division. And I think we can sort of quickly move on there
Yep.
and talk about the Bills and the Dolphins. Are the Bills going to get it done and win the division for the first time since, I believe, 1995?
Yep.
Or are the Dolphins going to creep up behind them and steal it away from them?
Bills are going to win that division. I think they're going to win 11, maybe even 12 games this season. They play the Broncos, the Dolphins, and the Patriots, and then the 49ers tomorrow. I can see them losing to maybe only the Steelers. So 12-4 is very realistic, which would be the best start in 20 years. Although the Dolphins have concerned me. Although they play the Bengals and the Patriots in the next 5 weeks, which should be wins, but then they play the Chiefs, the Raiders, and the Bills. So Miami needs to upset, which I'd be very happy if they upset the Raiders. I don't like them. But Dolphins are more than in this playoff race, like the wild card hunt. They're definitely, in my opinion, looking at all the other teams, they they could be one of them that make it. And I would love to see it. Honestly, to be honest with you, I would love to see them make it.
Yeah, I think the Dolphins are very much in the hunt for the division, very much in the hunt for a playoff spot. I agree with you. I think the Bills will. I think the Bills will get the job done. What I will say though is the Bills and Dolphins play in the last week of the season. How great would it be if the division was still up for grabs and you had the Bills and the Dolphins basically playing for the division week 17? That would be
That'd
fantastic to
be a
watch.
wild game.
As a neutral fan, I for one would really like to enjoy that. So I kind of hope it goes down that way. But I am picking the Bills. And then we have the fight in the AFC South, just because I want to talk about division winners, because the NFC is a lot more obvious in terms of wildcard teams, where I think the AFC it becomes a little bit more broad. So in the AFC, you have the Titans and the Colts battling it out. Who do you think comes away with the division there? Because in this case, just like how you have in the AFC East, you have the Bills at 8-3 and the Dolphins at 7-4. We're both leaning Bills at the better record, but I think because we also just, the Bills have a stronger roster. I think here with the 8-3 Titans and the 7-4 Colts, you might want to lean towards the Titans because of their better record. But I think roster-wise, these two teams are very similar in terms of talent.
I think the Titans are going to win that division just because of who they have to play. They play the Browns, which can go in their favor, the Jaguars, the Lions, the Packers, and the Texans. 4 of those games should be wins. While the Colts, on the other hand, have to play the Texans, the Raiders, the Texans again, the Steelers, and the Jags, which I can see them winning 3 of those games, but it's really going to come down to who's going to win those very, very, very important games. Um, and I just think the Colts aren't good enough yet. At least they're not good enough yet. Um, and I just think that they need a little more time to kind of develop and properly get to what they need to be. I can see them being pretty deadly in the next few years, but right now, I'm going to have the Titans, sorry, taking that division.
Yeah, I think it's very, very, very close. I think the first thing that's worth mentioning is that the unlike the Bills and the Dolphins, the Colts and the Titans have played twice and they've split the season series 1-1, which means the tiebreaker doesn't come down to best head-to-head record. It will come down to their win-loss percentage within the division, which like really overcomplicates things because it makes looking at it a lot harder in terms of if they have identical records. Um, it's so close, and I agree with you in terms of I think that the Titans have a slightly easier schedule in front of them coming down the stretch, and they do have the game advantage. And that's why I'm going to lean Titans. If the two of them had identical records, I might lean Colts. And it's so close, but I do agree with you. I think the Titans will do enough to just about hang on, but I think that the Colts is probably going to be like this is going to be the tightest race for the division, I think, in the NFL this year, and I think it's going to really come down to the wire between those two teams, and I think that both of those teams could go on to be very successful in the playoffs.
I can see the Colts being like really like I can see the Colts and Titans battling for the AFC South like more intensely, like what you said with the Dolphins and Bills, one game do all. Like I can see that for the next 3 or 4 years. The Colts look really good. The Titans look really good. Derrick Henry is an absolute monster. Like I would love to see them battle it out like that every single season for the next 5 seasons.
Yeah, I can see both of those divisions going down to the last game. And so then that leaves us to the three wildcard teams. And I think this is where it gets really interesting because we're just going to use the Dolphins as the placeholder for the AFC East because we both picked the Bills, and we're going to use the Colts as the placeholder in the AFC South because we both picked the Titans. But
Hmm.
when we say Colts and Dolphins, we just mean whoever doesn't win those divisions. Um, because quite frankly, there's four teams in three spots. You have the Dolphins, you have the Colts, you have the Browns, and you have the Ravens. And there's four teams and there's three spots. And this goes back to what we were talking about earlier with the Ravens' struggles. Is unfortunately one of those teams is going to be the odd team out. And if you look at record right now, the Ravens are that odd team out. Do you think it will stay that way come playoff time?
Yeah, honestly, I can see it staying that way, and I can see the Browns, the Colts, and the Dolphins all making the playoffs this year as wild card teams, and I would kind of love to see that. It's so like unorthodox and so not what would have happened like recent years. It's good to see. It's not. I like how it's like not who we expected would be in there. No one thought the Browns were going to be a wild card team. No one thought the Colts would have been a wild card team. No one would have thought the Dolphins would have been a wild card team. So for me, I really like this. I really like that it's like teams who no one expected to get there. And I think these are teams who are going to be very dominant in the next few years that are these wildcard teams. They're not there yet, but they can be. And I think those three teams are just going to stay where they are right now, and it's just going to be a, a choice of who comes first wild card, second wild card, and third wild card. But I don't doubt that they won't that they're going to change wild cards at all.
So you have the Ravens missing the playoffs.
I have the Ravens missing the playoffs. I think they've been shattered, just like the 49ers. I have, like, they've been hit with injuries. They've been hit with COVID. They're not even playing in San Francisco. Like, they've been hit with everything. They're not going to make the playoffs. They were in the Super Bowl last year. The Ravens have been hit with COVID. They've been hit with injuries. They've been hit with, you name it. They were in the division championship last year. Um, correct. Yeah, they were. No, they weren't. They were in the one before it. Um, anyways, these teams, I don't want to make excuses because they've been hit with quite a few issues. But the Browns have been hit with COVID. The Raiders have been hit with COVID. The Dolphins haven't been hit with COVID yet. The Colts haven't been hit with COVID, but the Titans have. So there are teams that are adapting and adopting to these new problems that they're dealing with in the world. Before it was just injuries. Now you can be put on the COVID list. Now you can be put on that long-term COVID list too. So I don't think the Ravens are making it this year, and I think that when the season's over and whoever wins it, I still have the Chiefs. Whoever wins it, the Ravens are going to have to seriously sit down with themselves and go back to every single game. What did we do wrong? Watch every single play. What could you have done better? What couldn't you have done better? Did you do this okay? Because the way they've played this year, it's sad to watch. They're not the Ravens who we knew last year. And I think they really need to figure themselves out before they can even have a chance at winning that division.
I completely agree with you. They're not the same Ravens that they were last year. I have them making the playoffs, and here's why. I think when you look at it, I think that you're going to need 10 wins to make the playoffs in the AFC, which is ridiculous that I'm saying that. And then, once again, not that I bring it up all the time because I know I bring it up all the time. The NFC is going to have like probably a 6 or 7 win playoff team. Meanwhile, everyone in the AFC is going to have 10 wins. That's what I believe. Where are these teams going to get their 10 wins? I'll tell you. The Colts, are going to get they have 7 wins right now. They're going to beat the Texans twice. They're going to beat the Jaguars. There's 10 wins for the Indianapolis Colts. They lose their division because I think the Titans will get at least 11. They make the playoffs as a wild card team, 10 wins. The Browns, they have 8 wins. They're going to beat the Giants. They're going to beat the Jets. There's their 10 wins right there. The Ravens, they have 6 wins right now. They're going to beat the Cowboys. They're going to beat the Browns. They're going to beat the Jaguars. They're going to beat the Giants. They're going to beat the Bengals. I think they can win out. I think that Ravens Brown game could go either way. So I think the Ravens either finish, I think that the Browns and Ravens are going to finish with 11 or 10 wins. One of them's going to have 11, one of them's going to have 10, depending on who wins that Browns Ravens game. Steelers are still going to win that division at 15-1 or 14-2. All three of those teams make the playoffs. Why? Because the Dolphins, who have 7 wins, they're going to beat the Bengals. That's going to get them to 8. They're going to lose to the Chiefs. They're going to beat the Patriots. That's going to get them to 9. They're going to lose to the Raiders. And then it's going to come down to that game against the Bills. And I think they're going to lose that game. They're going to be stuck on 9 wins. They're going to miss the playoffs.
I think they're gonna beat the Raiders. I really do.
And then here's the even bolder claim. The Raiders have 6 wins right now. They're going to beat the Jets. That's 7. They're going to beat the Chargers. That's 8. They're going to beat the Broncos. That's 9. So you have the Raiders on 9 wins. They have to play the Dolphins. I have the Dolphins on 9 wins. They have to play the Raiders. One of those teams is going to get 10 wins. So then you
I
have a
Yeah.
situation where if those things play out, you have the Dolphins, the Raiders, the Browns, the Ravens, and the Colts. All of those teams are going to be 9 or 10 win teams. So I think it's crazy. Ultimately, that I think that at the end of the day, there's going to be some wild tiebreakers and everything. But when I look at the confidence that I have in teams down the stretch to win games, I think the Dolphins are that odd team out.
And honestly, it's good to disagree because, it always shows that there's different opinions and that's okay, except you're wrong. Anyways, moving on. I'm kidding. I'm kidding. I'm kidding. Don't kill me.
No, no, of course. I definitely think that looking at it, the NFC is pretty much we kind of know how all the pieces are falling into place, with the exception of the NFC West and the division winner in the NFC East. Um, but in the NFC West, I'm pretty sure, like we said, all three of those teams will make the playoffs. It's just a matter of who wins the division. And then in the AFC, it's literally wide open. Like we said, 2 divisions are going to go down to the wire, and then that wild card race is going to be an absolute gong show all the way to the end. And so
I'm
that's why the NFL is really heating up.
I'm totally agreeing with you. It's going to be a wild ending.
And so that's NFL talk. And what we want to do to wrap up the podcast today is we want to get into some World Junior talk because, yeah, the World Juniors are just huge news in Canada, especially. But I think recently it's really become a global phenomenon. And I know that all of our viewers come from North America, but we have a lot of American listeners as well as Canadian listeners. And so, what I wanted to do just to wrap up is sort of take a look at some of the key players most likely to be on the Canadian and American World Junior rosters for the tournament coming up later this month. To do that first, though, we have to talk about some significant players who won't be there, as the New York Rangers announced that Alexis Lafreniere will not be playing for Team Canada, while the New Jersey Devils announced that Jack Hughes will not be playing for the Americans. So, your thoughts on those 2 losses for each country?
Expected. These are the most recent first overall picks in the NHL draft, and I'm sure that neither of these teams want them to even risk getting hurt. Um, I'm excited. It's starting in like a week and a half, and it's happening in Canada because obviously we saw during the NHL in the final season is the bubble worked very effectively. Now, obviously Lafreniere being an absolute monster last year with the Rimouski, um, that's going to be a big blow to Canada. Obviously, we don't, as a Canadian, we don't want to see it. We want, everyone effectively there, but I think Canada will be able to do okay without them. I want to say it is Team Canada, and I don't, you never can take away from Team Canada because, Canada seems to produce some of the best hockey players that have ever played. Um, but it is a big blow for both these teams. And Canada was expected to be the favorite in their group alongside US, Russia, the Czech, and Germany. And they still are because America lost Hughes, but it's definitely going to hurt both these teams in very various ways.
Yeah, here's the thing. Um, with Jack Hughes is that he's played a full season in the NHL already. And so I don't think anyone was expecting him to play for the Americans this year. As much as he's eligible, I mean, he has a full NHL season under his belt. So I didn't see it happening. Um, you can say what you want about his performance in the NHL, but he played in the NHL last year. So you never expected him to be released to the Americans. Where I think with Lafreniere, with him not playing in the NHL yet, obviously he would have been playing for the Rangers now already in a normal season, so he wouldn't have been released. But in the scenario where we're at now, it was still a possibility. I agree with you, it's not happening because of the risk of injury, which is unfortunate because the Senators announced that their top pick, and I'm blanking on the German's name,
Stutzla,
he thank you, Tim Stutzla. He's actually reporting to the German team. Now it's probably very different because literally Germany needs Tim Stutzla on that team. Um, Whereas Canada can still field, like you said, a very strong team without Lafreniere, just like how the Americans can field a very strong team without Jack Hughes. But I think it's really unfortunate. I was kind of hoping that this could kind of be like the 2005 World Junior team, where there was that lockout year, where every single team, but particularly that Canadian team, was absolutely loaded with talent because all of these guys who should have been playing in the NHL didn't have an NHL team to play for because of the lockout, so they got to play in the World Juniors. It doesn't look like we're going to get that with Lafreniere, which is disappointing because I would have just loved to have seen him absolutely body this tournament. But that unfortunately isn't going to happen. But we'll look at the Canadian roster first. I mean, especially in terms of who's going to replace the void that Lafreniere is going to fill. Canada is really, really strong at forward this year. I mean, just listing off some of their names: Connor McMichael, Kirby Doc, Dylan Cousins, Quinton Byfield, which, of course, we talk about Lafreniere being the number one pick. Number two pick, Quinton Byfield. They're in, probably going to make the team, probably going to be one of the leaders of the team. Peyton Krebs, Connor Zary, Cole Perfetti, Alex Newhook, Samuel Poulin, who Pittsburgh Penguins prospect. I just had to mention him as well. You go down the list. That was like 10 names strong, and all of those guys are absolute monsters at this level. Like really, really talented skaters. So I think at forward, Team Canada's not going to miss a beat.
I'm with you on this. So they have a very 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 deadly forward roster. If we look at Team USA's roster, it's still Trevor Zegras, Curtis Hall, Jack Drury, Cole Caulfield. I know you want to talk about him. Alex Turcotte, Leaf forward Nick Robertson, who actually scored his first goal last year in the playoffs. John Beaker, Oliver Warstrom, Parker Ford, Shane Pinto, Bobby Brink, Jacob Pivonka, Arthur Kiliev, Jordan Harris, Cam York, Zach Jones, Spencer Stastny, Condre Miller, Ty Embersey, and Matthew Samuelson. I know you want to talk a bit about Cole Caulfield. I'd like to talk quickly about Nick Robertson just because of my familiarity with him. Last year, when he played with the Leafs in the playoffs, he was really good. Like he looked really good, and I think he's going to be a big problem for Team Canada. I really do think he's going to be a big problem. Him and Caulfield together are going to be absolutely deadly, and I think that's going to be a line. I think they'll be on a line together. I think that's going to be a line that scores maybe the most goals in the World Juniors this year. It's bold, but both of those players have shown absolute excellent promise in their their skills and their hockey sense and their passing, their skating, their shooting, their scoring. Like they're absolutely ridiculous.
Yeah, I think that when you look at the Americans on offense, they are as talented up front as the Canadians are, and I think this also goes to show um, Canadian fans watch more college hockey and American fans watch more CHL hockey because it's very hard to sort of compare the two. But it's really interesting. For example, Cole Caulfield and Alex Turcotte were teammates at the University of Wisconsin in NCAA, and they were both point per game players in college. Like absolutely fantastic in college, and they played for the same uh, university down there for Wisconsin. So that's obviously really going to help chemistry, especially when you talk about a short term tournament. That's something that's going to be really good for them. Obviously, you look at Nick Robertson having NHL experience, NHL playoff experience. That's going to go a long way for the Americans. And then you switch over to Team Canada and you have a very similar story. They're teammates on this team, but you also have a guy in Kirby Doc who has NHL experience, of course, with the Chicago Blackhawks. Samuel Poulin hasn't played for the Penguins, but he's been like in and around the team with training and everything. So he got to play with Sidney Crosby actually in the not the preseason, but in like the COVID preseason, like before the playoffs started. So that's still good experience. I think it's going to be very interesting up front because these teams are equally stacked. Meanwhile, when you look at the defense, you mentioned a couple of the American names. I think that the defense is very similar as well, where both of these teams have a very strong top two, and then after that it kind of tails off. I think the Canadians have a little bit more strength on defense. Obviously, the Americans are going to probably roll with Cam York and Jake Sanderson as their top pair, and I think it's going to be you're going to be really hard pressed to find a better top pair than that. I think when you compare, Canada's going to probably go with Bowen Byram and Jamie Drysdale as their top pairing, and that take nothing away from the two of them, but I think York and Sanderson's a better pairing. But probably the four best defensemen at the tournament are right there. I think that Canada with Caden Gooley and Matthew Robertson have a little bit more depth than the Americans do. Uh, but then I think the big point for the Americans is that they have Spencer Knight in net, and that could be a big, big problem because Spencer Knight is probably the best goalie who is eligible to play in this tournament.
Yeah, he's going to be a huge problem because the goalies that Team Canada have are not. I don't want to say they're not even close. They're just as eligible to be in this tournament as he is. Nico Dawes is pretty good. Joel Hofer is okay. Oliver Rodriga, um, like they're good, but it's Spencer Knight. Like you said, Spencer Knight is an absolute monster, and that's I agree with you. I think that's the one thing they have on Canada that Canada can't keep up with. Um, that's going to be the reason why America wins. If they do win, is going to be him. He's going to be a lot. He reminds me a lot of like Freddie on the Leafs. Is they're going to rely a lot on him because both of these teams are going to be able to put up 30, 40 shots a game, no problem. But that's the problem is they're putting up 30, 40 shots a game. So the goaltenders are going to be quite busy every single game. And I think Spencer Knight will just outplay the other Canadian goalies.
Yeah, I mean, Spencer Knight is definitely the big question, the biggest point because it's not a question mark. Where I think when you look at Team Canada, where's their goaltending going to come from? I think that becomes the big question mark. And, you know, uh, goaltending is such a huge point at this tournament. Um, and it's going to be really interesting to see what Canada ends up going with, whoever their goalie ends up being. If there's a goalie who comes out and who makes their case to compete and be that guy, and at this point, none of those goalies jump out at me in the same way that Spencer Knight jumps out at me. Obviously, he's played at Boston College for the last few years, and I just last year at Boston College, he played 33 games, 5 shutouts, 931 save percentage, 1.97 goals against average. And then in 3 games so far this year, 1 shutout, 938 save percentage. He's 3-0 this year. He went 23-2-8 last year for Boston College. The guy is like, if you talk about goaltending prospects, I think him and the Russian goalie Askarov are the two that
Mm.
come to mind, and then it's not particularly close after them. And I think that when you look at like it, goaltending can go so far in these tournaments because you need a big save here, you need a big save there. And I think that when Canada looks at who their biggest competition is, I think they look at Russia and I think they look at the US. And I think that the difference between Russia and Canada is that the Russians are not as talented at forward and defense in the same way that Canada is. So although Askarov will be their goalie, Canada will be a better team overall. Whereas the Americans match up really well against Canada on forward and on defense, and it looks like they'll have the advantage in the net. So that becomes quite the problem.
I'm with you. I'm looking at this Team Russia roster, and I don't. It's good. Like it's not deadly potent. Like it's not deadly. But I look at that goaltender Askarov, and that could be a game changer. He really could. He will be the reason why Germany does decent this season. This
Russia,
tournament.
Russia.
Russia. My apologies. I meant Russia. I was looking at Russia. Um. Yeah, he looks good. Like he really does look good, and obviously getting picked 11th overall, I believe, by Nashville. Um, like it just goes to show that's he was the highest goalie in this draft, in the last draft. So, he's been playing great in St. Petersburg, and I think he's going to play great in Edmonton.
Absolutely. The one thing I will say about this tournament is that the groups are very unevenly matched. And obviously the groups are determined based on how the teams did in the last year's tournament. So like Group B has nobody to blame but themselves. But Russia, Sweden, USA, and Czech Republic all in the same group, while Canada has Finland, Switzerland, Slovakia, and Germany. So Canada should win that group. The only problem with that is that they'll have to play the fourth place team in Group B, which should be the Czech Republic. But if the Czech Republic get an upset win, Sweden, Russia, USA could fall to that fourth spot. But I think and then the other question then becomes, because there's the whole crossover format, if you finish first or second in that Group B, whether that's Russia, Sweden, USA, if they finish first or second, they're probably going to get an easy matchup in the quarterfinals, like Germany or Switzerland. So as much as Canada has a very easy group stage and I'd expect them to win, that doesn't necessarily mean anything when it could be Czech Republic in the quarterfinals. Whereas in Group B, obviously, the Americans are going to have to play Russia, Sweden, Czech Republic right out of the gates, which could be a problem if you don't figure it out and you start losing a couple games early, that obviously doesn't help. But if you win that group and you end up facing Germany or Switzerland in the quarterfinals, obviously no disrespect to those teams, but speaking of quarterfinals, that's a pretty easy quarterfinal matchup. So I think that if Russia or USA can start the tournament off hot, that's basically a free pass through to the semifinals, which could be a bit problematic for Canada down the stretch.
I'm 100%. My 100% agree with you. My prediction is either Canada or the U.S. win it, but I think Germany and Russia make it close.
I agree with you. I think that Canada and USA are the favorites. I think that if I had to pick a dark horse, I'd pick Sweden.
Okay.
And then I'd pick. I think Germany is going to be a lot better than people think. I actually think Germany could finish second in Canada's group ahead of Finland. I think they're that good, especially if all of those German players. It's not just Stutzla, but there are two other players who were picked in the first round. If they all come back and Germany plays as a cohesive team, I agree with you. They could be a big problem. But Russia and USA play on Christmas. First game in that group. I think whoever wins that game in Group B against Russia versus USA, I think whoever wins that game has a pretty much like as much as it's kind of weird to say because it's the first game of the tournament. I think whoever wins that first game of the tournament slot them into the semifinals because they'll win the group and then they'll win an easy easy quarterfinal matchup. And so for those two teams, it's going to be about firing on all cylinders to begin with. And Canada's first game is against Germany, and they better not take that lightly because if they come out flat, they could be up for a much bigger challenge than they think, especially because historically Germany's been a pretty comfortable win. It won't be this year.
Yeah, no, it'll definitely be tougher this year. And thank goodness it's on Christmas. Merry Christmas to everybody. First game of hockey in months. I know myself and you are kind of we're maybe losing our sanity a little bit with no hockey because right now we'd be middle of the NHL season. Obviously, a little different this year. Um, I'm excited. I'm really excited to see how Canada plays, and not just Team Canada, but these potential NHL future stars. One playing for the Leafs, obviously on America. I'm just excited to see how these young guys are going to play and how maybe they're going to play out in the NHL.
Absolutely. And of course, we have hopefully the hopeful news that the NHL might be able to play a 50-game season starting in January at some time. But what we do know is that the next significant hockey game will be the World Juniors for a lot of people in North America that start on Christmas. Of course, the NBA will be tipping off by Christmas as well. Um, but for those hockey fans who are looking to really get back into it, uh, the World Juniors are a great opportunity to watch. Obviously, I watch all of Canada's games, but especially with Christmas break in school and with the COVID lockdown and everything like that, on a December 29th, where I'm not allowed to leave the house, and, if you have a Finland versus, like, I don't even know, Czech Republic game on, maybe that's a game that I would have never otherwise watched that all of a sudden becomes like your best option
Yeah.
with no NHL hockey taking place.
I'm with you, man. I'm excited. It's going to be hockey and basketball coming up in the next few weeks. NHL still hasn't really decided. Sometime in January, they said. So that's that's good news, I guess. Hopefully, we'll see it a lot sooner than what's going on right now.
Yeah, positive talks for sure. And of course, moving forward, we know the NBA starting off for sure in a couple of weeks' time, which means that we're probably about 2 weeks away from your NBA season preview podcast special, which will probably come out, I'd say, a couple of days before the NBA season tips off. So look forward to that. And then also at the end of the calendar year, so probably around the same time, I want to do a sort of year wrap up where we talk about some other sports that we might not mention. I know we talked a little bit about the MLS playoffs last week. We were very wrong about Orlando, but hey, Seattle's still in it, so we were half right. We were half
Yeah.
right. So hopefully you bet on Seattle because they're still alive. But yeah, definitely we'll be wrapping up MLS and then also probably talk a little bit more about soccer moving forward. Premier League, Champions League, all of that. We'll probably talk closer to the end of the month about as well. But for now, that will wrap up another episode of the Benchwarmers Sports Talk podcast. So, wherever you are listening from, we thank you very much. And wherever you're listening, be sure to give us a thumbs up if you are on YouTube. Rate us 5 stars if you are listening on Apple Podcasts. I'm not sure if there's anything you can do on, I think it's follow on Spotify. I might be wrong there. But no matter where you're listening, we do appreciate your support. Any last words, Jacob?
Yeah. Thank you guys for listening. And Jacksonville is winning the Super Bowl.
Yeah, you always. I keep forgetting we always have to sign off with a bold prediction. So the Ravens are playing the Cowboys this week. Trace McSorley's starting, and he's throwing for 350 yards and 4 touchdowns. And then the Ravens are going to play the Trace McSorley song in the locker room after the game, and it's going to blow up on TikTok. You heard
Yeah.
it here
No mask.
first.
No mask. They're gonna get fined like
And no masks,
500,000.
and then they're going to get fined a bunch of money. There you go. You heard it here first. So this has
Jim
been
Harbaugh's gonna win the Stanley Cup. You heard it here.
So this has been the Benchwarmers Sports Talk podcast. Thank you guys for listening, and goodbye.